For those of you who don't know me, I'm Hannah Essex, and I'm the Co-Executive Director at the British Chambers of Commerce, a role I've job shared with Claire Walker for the past 2.5 years. Now, as many of you hopefully know, the British Chambers of Commerce is a network of 53 chambers of commerce that work right across the UK and who represent between them around 75,000 businesses employing 6 million people across the United Kingdom. And we also have a global network of 70 British chambers and business associations in markets right around the globe. So although our roots are local, our reach is absolutely global. And I'll come on shortly to introduce you to our fabulous panelists for the today and our speaker who's going to kick us off later on. And then it'll be we'll be sharing lots of questions that have come in from people in advance and having a really good and wide-ranging discussion. But before we do that, I'm just going to set a bit of the context for this discussion. Now, the pandemic has been really tough on all of us, I think, in lots of different ways. But if anything positive has come out of the last 12 months, is that more of us are embracing this kind of digital communications and connecting to more people here in the UK and right around the world. And today's event is a really great example of that. So it's been driven by two members of the British Chambers of Commerce, two of our accredited chambers, Sheffield Chamber and Devon and Plymouth Chamber. But many other chambers from right around the network have been promoting this event, and we're delighted to be joined by colleagues from Barnsley and Rotherham, from Doncaster, from Hampshire, Ayrshire, Greater Manchester, East Midlands, Somerset, Cornwall, Coventry and Warwickshire, and Glasgow, and I'm sure a few more as well. And I'm down here on the coast in Sussex, so we really are covering the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. Beyond the health impact of COVID-19, this has really been a year of historical setbacks for businesses right across the country. As you know, the British Chambers of Commerce network runs a quarterly economic survey, and it's been running for the past 30 years, where we can really see the trends in business confidence and business activity across the UK. And our stats for the second quarter of 2020, when the pandemic really hit, showed the largest decline in history for business conditions in the UK in terms of cash flow, revenues, and so on. And although we've seen some slight ups and downs over the course of the year, things are still looking pretty bad for many businesses and for the UK economy as a whole. It's particularly, as you know, it's obvious that there are some sectors that have been hit harder than others. So hospitality, hotels, catering, that kind of business has been really hit hardest. But we also have seen over the course of the last year a real impact on the supply chain and those businesses that provide support to those services, to those businesses that have been closed for a substantial part of the last 12 months. Now, I probably don't need to tell you what kind of business impact there's been, because I'm sure you've all experienced it in many different ways. But in this unprecedented and very difficult year, we've really seen the best of British businesses come to the fore in a real national effort to get through this year, to support one another and to support our communities. There were members of business communities around the country who answered the government's calls, for example, to adapt their production lines to produce PPE, hand sanitizer, to repurpose their spaces, to provide support for the NHS and for other people in our communities, to redistribute unused PPE and support other efforts, distribute food and things that people needed, and keeping our NHS workers supported and fed. And all of these efforts were recognised by our patron, Her Majesty the Queen. And in our Business Heroes campaign last year, they were congratulated by Her Royal Highness the Countess of Wessex. So the efforts that businesses have gone to have not gone unnoticed, right from the head of state and beyond. And the Chamber network has really come to the fore as well. They've really been the first responders in helping businesses to get through the last 12 months. And together, we've worked hard to make sure that government really understands the impact that the pandemic has had on businesses across the UK, and to provide the support that has been needed to get people through this very difficult time. So we've worked on a range of issues, including the furlough scheme, the extension to that scheme, the flexibility that was brought into that scheme came from work we did with the Treasury last year, along with other organisations. We've managed to get changes to the initial grant funding and changes to the way that local authorities have distributed those grants as a result of the feedback that we got from the businesses that we've been speaking to along the way. We've also pushed for the extension around rates relief and VAT holidays. And all of these things have actually had a real tangible impact on the ability of businesses to get through these last 12 months. And more recently, we've been pushing the government for a longer term economic recovery strategy, more not just in terms of the immediate business support that's needed, but the incentives to invest and to grow and to get the country back on a track for recovery after this pandemic is hopefully at some point going to be over. So and we've been really pushing around the roadmap. So we wrote to the government a few months ago to say that it was really important that as we started to come out of restrictions, businesses had clarity about what that was going to look like and how they should plan for it. And we continue to ask government questions around that. We'll be doing something, hopefully you'll see in the media tomorrow, asking about how those tests are going, the tests that they set out around the roadmap, how are they being met, and what are the critical what's the critical information and the decisions that businesses need in order to be able to get back up and running as the roadmap unfolds. Now, we really face some very big challenges. Even before the pandemic, as a country, we face some big challenges. And our task now is to tackle those as we recover. And I think we would lack ambition if we said that we just simply wanted to get back to where we were before. There's lots of talk of building back better and building back greener. And these are some of the things that we'll be talking about today. Chambers of Commerce, with their roots in local business communities, are keenly aware of the long-standing issues in local areas and the need to address these and to create better economic growth, to create jobs, and to create a better future for all of us. Whether it's skills, infrastructure, connectivity, saving the planet, we've got a lot to do, and we'll be discussing with the panelists today how we might go about tackling some of those issues as business communities and as a country. We know that British firms across the country are eager to get back to doing what they do best, to servicing their customers, improving their products and services, developing their staff, and growing their businesses. So to give you the best chance of making it through these difficult times, we'll be continuing to call on government not only to continue the support that's needed as we come out of this difficult time, but to set out a really ambitious plan which accelerates the recovery and incentivises innovation and growth as we look to a better future. And Chambers of Commerce will be there to support members. Every time you complete a survey for the Chambers, every time you share what's happening with you, this is all fed into the work that we do to influence government and to try and improve conditions for all of you across the country. So plenty for us to discuss there. Lots of different questions that have come in, which will hopefully be of interest to you, and hopefully some things that you can take away and think about and discuss further within your business communities after today. Before we get to the panel, it's my great pleasure to introduce Councillor Maza Iqbal. Maza is a councillor within Sheffield City Council and a Cabinet Member for Business and Investment. His previous position includes Cabinet Member for Public Health and Equality, and he also served as a Cabinet Member for Infrastructure and Transport. And today Maza is going to join us to talk to us about the power of collaboration. Maza, over to you.
Thanks very much, Hannah. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you all today as we focus our collective attention and action on business and economic recovery. As Hannah's introduced me, I'm the Cabinet Member for Business Investment here in Sheffield. I've held this role for the past 4 years. As Hannah said, the pandemic has had a profound economic impact right across the UK over the past 12 months. I'm sure as Chambers, you've been at the coalface alongside local authorities as we've been doing all we can to support the businesses and communities we serve. I am very grateful that you have invited me today. And like Hannah, I could talk extensively about the impact of COVID and the action we need to reopen our economy and address the long-standing inequalities that have been further ingrained throughout the pandemic. However, as I've only been given a short time with you, I want to focus in my call to action, which is to collaborate. We need to find the right solutions. We need to bring partners, the private and public sector together. And that's why events like these are important, that bring civic, city and business leaders together. I thought I'd share some of our recent experience through COVID on action-based collaboration. In March of last year, 2020, we formed the COVID-19 Sheffield Business Response Group. This group was created to identify the needs of the local business community and raise awareness about the support and resources available to businesses across our city region. This group is made up of a collaborative partnership between the Sheffield City Council, Sheffield City Region, Sheffield Chamber of Commerce, Sheffield Digital, Sheffield Property Association, Sheffield Business Together, the Institute of Directors, and the Company of Cutlers in Hallamshire. Our work also includes our educational institutions in the city. This includes the University of Sheffield, Sheffield Hallam University, and Sheffield College. For me, this was not just a group of organisations, though the people in the room were passionate, proactive, and definitely action orientated. So often we have city partnership boards at the strategic level, but the business response group here in Sheffield's focus was to collaborate on action now, to enable and help each other to share knowledge, to share networks and ideas, but mainly to deliver. This collaboration led to the co-authoring of our City Business Recovery Plan, a framework for collective action that aims to mitigate the immediate problems businesses are facing, support reopening and recovery, as well as provide a steer for future growth. I took this plan through our city's cabinet and it's now been formally adopted. Our attention is now on implementing the plan with organisations in its formation. They are now also overseeing its delivery. Our business response group is enabling our city's businesses, community and local government to work together in new ways. Together, we are connecting the dots and spotting the new opportunities. This is how we will get our economy back and running in full. I am grateful to the Chamber Network for creating this event today to bring us together as we seek to work collectively. Like everybody else, I'm looking forward to hearing the questions that have been submitted by you to present to our panelists. Once again, thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Mazza, and really great to hear about the collaboration that's happening there in Sheffield. And I think some of the principles you were talking about there around collaboration is really at the heart of what Chambers of Commerce are all about, and something that they do around convening and bringing people together. So thank you very much for that opening remarks. Now, my pleasure to introduce you now to the panelists who are ready and raring to go and answering the questions that have come in. So I'm going to start, if you could, I know it's really corny, but if you could give a wave when I mention you, just so everyone can see you on the screen there. My first panelist is Martin McKervey. Martin is director of AES Seal, a global manufacturing company with a net zero carbon footprint in its UK operations. Martin is also chair of the Sheffield Property Association, vice chair of Sheffield Culture Collective, and a non-executive director at the Sheffield Chamber of Commerce. He also has a number of other roles in charitable and voluntary organisations, and is the High Sheriff of the County of South Yorkshire, nominated for 21-22, which sounds very impressive, and I'd love to hear more about that. We've also got an MP from the Southwest. We've got Luke Pollard, MP here. Very appropriate Zoom backdrop there. Some of you will recognise it. Luke is the Shadow Secretary for the Environment, Shadow Secretary of State for the Environment, and has been at the centre of Westminster politics during the coronavirus pandemic, whilst also representing the business and public communities of his constituency in Plymouth. He's born and bred in Plymouth and was elected as the Labour and Cooperative Member of Parliament for Plymouth, Sutton and Devonport in June 2017 and was re-elected in 2019. These elections come around very quickly at the moment, don't they? So welcome to you, Luke. Then we've got Alison Edgar, MBE. Alison is also known as the entrepreneur's godmother, very on brand as well, and matching pink top. I'm enjoying this. This is good. Alison is the entrepreneur's godmother to a plethora of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, brings a matchless amalgamation of outside the box thinking, insight, and knowledge to the world of professional development and leadership. Delighted to have you here, Alison. We've also got Tim Elgar. Tim is part of the dynamic leadership team at Twinkl. Any working parents on the Zoom call will probably get emails from Becky at Twinkl. She's been a bit of a lifeline for all of us during the lockdown. We're very grateful. Twinkl is an organisation that helps those who teach by creating high quality resources and tools, ranging from schemes of work and assessments to augmented reality games and much more. Twinkl is proud to support educators of all kinds across the world and working parents who are trying to homeschool, and now has over 9.9 million signups to its website. Tim leads on organisational culture, leadership and regional engagement from Twinkl. Very nice to have you here. Thank you. Our next panelist, Dr. Lucy Davis. Lucy Jane was elected chair of the BMA Southwest Regional Council in 2018. In that role, she represents the 30,000 doctors and medical students who live and work in the southwest of England. She studied medicine as a mature student at Peninsula Medical School in Plymouth and has worked in public health medicine in Bristol for many years, recently returning to South Devon, having chosen to retrain as a GP. Welcome to you, Lucy Jane. And then we have Jane Jones. Jane is Head of Public Affairs at Great Western Railway, also very on brand with the train behind you there. And Great Western Railway, part of First Group, and operates long distance regional and local rail services in the South West and South Wales. They regularly work in partnership with local government and local enterprise partnerships to deliver rail improvements, supporting economic development. Jane has also served as a city councillor in Plymouth. And finally we have Barry White, not the much loved singer. Sorry, I'm sure you get that an awful lot, but if you do want to sing a tune, that would be great. Barry initially served in the army and then led major projects for construction companies, and latterly held leadership roles in the public sector to develop and deliver major investment programs, and has a particular passion for transport, affordable housing, and improving digital connectivity. In Barry's current role, the development of connectivity to improve opportunities and quality of life for people and communities in the north of England is at the heart of his work. So welcome to you, and thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. We're going to go straight into the first question. Now, this is an area around, as we said, we've brought together people from right across the country. So this is a very particular question around regional expansion and how you grow your business into different parts of the country. So it's from a business manager of a consultancy that's helping the organisation to deliver innovative systems, and it's headquartered currently in Surrey. I'm going to be asking this question to Martin, Tim and Alison. So the question is, we've grown again this year as a technology and engineering consultancy. That growth has been heavily centred on the Northwest and Bristol areas. We want to balance that across all of our UK offices from Glasgow to Plymouth to make us a more viable business. We've found the Southwest, past Bristol, has been quite difficult for us to recruit high quality engineering people. What can we do to turn that tide? We pay the same rates across our offices based on our Dorking headquarters, so we don't think it's about money. Now, this is a conversation that we've had with colleagues from the Southwest as part of the Chamber Network, is how do you attract great people to work in the Southwest, and what can we do to turn the skills agenda around, and make sure that we have opportunities for people right across the country? So Martin, I'm going to come to you first on that one.
Okay, thank you. I think the question is something that dominates a lot of our thinking in Sheffield and the Sheffield City region. I think ultimately it's about how you create the correct conditions to attract investment, attract new businesses, and how you develop a skills strategy, which means that you have the right talent in the right place at the right time. I think one of the problems we've got, and it's a problem I think right across the north of England, is we have such an economic disconnect as a country. The wealth creation of London and the southeast is in sharp contrast to any economic metric of the north of England. Our productivity is low, our skills are a challenge, our levels of investment are not what they should be. And I go back to something that Councillor Iqbal said a few minutes ago, which I think is at the very heart of trying to drive some solutions to this. We have to find new ways of collaborating and new ways of creating partnerships where local authorities, mayoral development, mayoral corporations, mayoral combined authorities, working in tandem with local authority leaders, with business leaders. And I think we also have to draw our education sector into this, working with universities, where we begin to create that economic stability, where businesses have an opportunity to invest, to grow, to attract talent. And, you know, I throw this out as just one illustration. We educate 60,000 students in Sheffield in our two fantastic universities. And I think the evidence would suggest in recent years that once those students have concluded their studies, not many of them are staying with us. And I think that's a drain of talent that we need to try and find some way of reversing. Because quite frankly, we ought to be more ambitious than just educating people here. We should want to create the economic conditions for them to stay here, to have their first job, to buy their first house, to have their family here, so that they become part of our wider economic ecosystem.
Thanks, Martin. Tim.
Yeah, I think, just building on that, obviously we've learned an awful lot in this last year around the use of digital and digital technologies. And I suppose, you know, have we seen a shift now in recruitment, and have we seen a shift in where people can locate from, can we work? Is it going to be the norm that somebody can work flexibly, or that you know, working from home obviously is going to be a key thing? And so there is questions now for us as a businesses, and how do we embrace this, and what is the expectation on that work pattern? How wide are we going with our recruitment? Can people be based anywhere? Certainly in businesses like ours, that's certainly possible. Appreciate that's different and more challenging in people who need to engineering, etc., where they need to be on site. But just picking up on Martin's point, really, yeah, it is about new business as well, and encouraging that. And I would say sometimes I look at Sheffield again, where we are, and I think sometimes we lack aspiration, and that's aspiration, perhaps as a city at times, but also as a business community as well. And how do we really encourage innovation, growth, and reinvestment? And I think, you know, something we've done as a business over this last year with incredible rewards, and we've been in a very fortunate position to be able to do that, is that we've developed an accelerator hub ourselves, and you know, we've made over 40 investments in the last year, and we've created about 50 new jobs as an example, and that's really exciting. But there's questions now, is how do we build this ecosystem around that as a city? And I think there's opportunity there, and there's collaboration, and that is required, and there's a collaboration on investment. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Really interesting to hear some of the work you've been doing. Alison, we'll come to you, get your thoughts, and also interested in whether you think this sort of the experience of the last 12 months has changed the way people are thinking about work-life balance, and whether or not places like the Southwest can actually capitalise on that.
I think it's really interesting, feeding into what Martin was saying about Sheffield, because obviously you've got really high educational facilities in Sheffield. For me, like when I think of Sheffield, I think of the Human League, scissors, and education. So that's the three things I think of. But I work closely with Swindon and Wiltshire. So despite having a Scottish accent, I'm actually based in Wiltshire. And one of the things that's come up prior to COVID is, how do they attract talent? Because they do not have the educational settings. And it always seemed a little bit that it was easier for other areas than it was for Swindon and Wiltshire, as if not having an educational university meant that everybody had it a little bit better. So again, it's really interesting to hear that other areas, geographic, have the same problems. But I do think two things. I think, again, now we are much more connected. Obviously, engineering is slightly different to other, you know, the marketing side of things, or digital marketing, where you can do that from anywhere. But I completely agree that, like, the Southwest specifically has got a great, you know, if you look at Plymouth, you know, down at the Hoe, that's how I think you can attract, is actually what the people want. And, you know, looking at Sheffield, you know, what is it as a geographic that younger people want? Why do they leave? And I think actually, if we do work together and collaborate together, we can actually look at those main things that drive. Because if you look again, you know, there was talk about London and the Southeast, but you know, they might come with a higher pay packet, but they also come up with higher house prices, and that, you know, there's a positive and a negative to it. Whereas although the north of the country, there might be a north-south divide when it comes to pay packet, there's also a north-south divide on what the cost of living is. So to me, I think that the connectivity is huge, the digital connectivity. And I was on a call yesterday with Esther McVie talking about, you know, how often you've been on calls like this and it Zoom freezes, or so. I think actually that we can work more remotely. I think it's much better for productivity. So from me, coming from predominantly a sales background, before I set the company up, you know, you could only really do 4 calls per day, whereas actually now it's more acceptable to be using Zoom for meetings. But if you haven't got the connectivity and on the digital space, then we are in danger of having to go back to the way we did things before, after having moved so far forward. So that's sort of my thoughts and my positive, that actually we've come so far. I would hate to go back. So yeah, I'm Alison.
Thanks, Alison. I think this question came originally from Ivor Humphrey, who's on the call. Ivor, did you want to come back on anything you've heard?
No, it's quite interesting. There's been a lot of chat about flexibility of employment, and my company's now just over 900 people, the company I work for, and flexibility of employment is a key factor we're seeing in new recruiting. So I think whilst the points about investing so that people want to stay where they're educated and in the right areas, I think that what COVID has shown us is that we don't have to be tied to our offices anymore. And the only thing that drives us to be in regions is our customer base. And our customers are now getting to the point where they're not worried if somebody's on their floor plate, but actually if they're on their screen, that's good enough. So actually it's giving people the quality of life. Plymouth's a great place to live. So's Hull. I was in Navy for 34 years. I know a lot of cities around the UK, and Hull's a lovely place. So there's lots of lovely places to live and work. We just need to be able to get people to understand, how do we get people to understand that quality of life is as important as flexibility in working? And it's getting that message across.
Thanks, Ivor. And we're going to pick up on some of the things around connectivity later on, but I think there's some interesting things to look out for. A couple of big banks have this week talked about how they're going to be encouraging their teams to work more flexibly and more agilely in the recovery and for the indefinite future. So there's definitely a sort of shift in the way people are thinking about work and how they work. I think the key to that is really thinking about how you're going to make that work for all of your team and all of your customers. And a couple of other things to look out for. The government's FE Skills White Paper put a real emphasis on skills, but particularly an employer-led approach to skills planning. And we hope that Chambers of Commerce will be playing a really key role in looking and working with their business communities to identify future skills needs and how we can encourage young people and others throughout their lives to take on the training and development they need to be able to contribute to the businesses in their communities. And the Chamber Network also have run a commission on in-work training and development to help support their people in work to continue to develop as the world changes around us. And we'll be reporting on that in April, so that's something to look out for as well. Really interesting question to kick things off. We're going to move on to a question around net zero. Now, when I travelled around the country for the regional assemblies, we have 5 regions around the UK that we regularly go around and talk to chamber members around different issues around policy to help shape what BCC does. And in February last year, we went and did this, and the top issue that people wanted to talk to us about was net zero and how to reduce carbon usage in this country. And it was like the number one thing. We were going to do loads of work on it, and then literally 2 weeks later we were heading into this pandemic and the lockdown, and it kind of got shifted to one side, but it's very much back on the agenda. We've got COP26 happening in the UK, either virtually or physically later on in Glasgow. So a couple of questions here that have come through around this agenda in particular. So the first is from a regional director of an employee-owned architectural practice which operates right across the UK. Where do we invest our time and money in shaping the national recovery efforts? Do we look to the future to help our economy move towards net zero, or do we tread too softly and conservatively to maintain the status quo? And then it becomes quite provocative. So retail, for example, on the high streets and a car-dominated society are 2 issues that we could discuss. Why travel to retail when retail can come to us? And I think we've all had lots of deliveries coming over the last 12 months. Why do we keep investing in cars? Their carbon footprint from inception to scrappage is a disaster for the planet, and it is impacting on our health, and we're becoming a lazy, obese and sedentary society. So question here is, can the road to net zero actually also help us improve our health? Should we be focusing on saving retail? There's a lot of talk about saving the high streets, but actually we'd be better thinking about how retail comes to us. So lots of interesting aspects to that question. So I'm going to come to Lucy first on this question.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I guess as a doctor, you'd expect me to say things about people getting fit and healthy in walking lots, and actually that's really important. However, there is also the flip side. I work in a rural community, and I'm very conscious that a lot of people where I am are very heavily dependent on cars to be able to do very simple things, which you take for granted if you live in a city. There's a balance. There's always a balance. We need to improve things like our cycling networks. We need to make, and it all fits with sustainability, both for the environment, but also for our population. And if we don't get that right, then we are in a pickle. So there's a balance. There's a balance to all of these things, and it's about taking a holistic view of those issues. I guess the other thing to say is that in terms of sustainability, we've seen a huge shift towards communities coming together, particularly in rural settings, and providing amazing support within their community. So maybe we need to think more about sharing cars, sharing journeys once we've got a bit further down the line and it's all a bit safer. So there's got a lot to think about.
Thanks, Lucy Jane. I'm going to come to Luke now. There seems to be political consensus around the sort of net zero ambition. Do you think there's consensus around how we get there and what we do around things like cars and transport?
That's a good question. There's consensus around the words net zero. Everyone's very trapped with net zero as an idea, but then when you ask how you get there, it's much easier to say than it is to achieve. And when you start attaching far off dates to it, so net zero by 2050 is a world leading commitment that the government has. But by 2050, nearly everyone on this screen will have retired. It's so long grasped that actually it makes it meaningless. That's why you need to have robust interim targets to make it work. But I think, it's consistent with all the comments we've heard. There's no going back to business as usual after the pandemic. The consequences of Brexit, the climate and ecological emergency, and the pandemic and the economic whirlwind means that business as usual doesn't exist. It's not a destination that we can get back to. And so you need to make the most of it and look at it where it goes. But the other reality is for businesses, especially in relation to the question that we're asked, is there's not a future for businesses that aren't going to move to net zero, that aren't going to adapt early. And in fact, if anything, there's a first mover advantage in terms of building market share, innovating to doing it. There's also an advantage of being second mover in that respect, and so allowing someone to take the initial upfront costs, but there's no advantage for being last mover. And that is really important that we can send that message. So whatever sector people are working in, they're going to need to be able to innovate and drive change. And that's not only looking at carbon, which is absolutely critical that we decarbonize our economy and do so in a fair way, but that we have to look at nature at the same time. And that relates to the habitats, the water usage that we have, the air impacts that our activities bring. Taken together, these are huge challenges, but we're not going to be able to achieve anything anywhere near net zero unless this is a proper nationwide endeavour. And the thing I worry about when you mentioned about cars is if you live in Wandsworth, you have more electric cars than anywhere else in the country. But Plymouth has one of the lowest levels of electric car usage in the country. That's not only about the massive transformation we need from combustion engines to electric propulsion, but it's about a recognition that deprivation poverty is leading to lower EV take-up, and the fact that investment is still far too focused on rich, affluent areas rather than poorer communities. And that debate almost leaves out the entirety of rural England that has virtually no plan for electric vehicle charge out. So we've got a real urgency to act, but in acting urgently, we need to make sure that we have one eye, and I would say this is a dodgy socialist, on the social justice implications to make sure it's a fair and equitable rollout, because at the moment it seems to be heavily lopsided towards those people that can afford to decarbonize, but we need everyone to decarbonize. And that means we have to have a fairer approach, I think.
Thanks, Luke. I was discussing this with someone the other day, and they said that the ambition around electric vehicles is just 9 years away, which doesn't actually seem very long when you think about the shift that we're going to have to make from where we are now to where we want to be in terms of the infrastructure to support electric vehicles and the change that is going to require. Barry, how are Transport for the North addressing the net zero challenge?
I think we see net zero both as a challenge and an opportunity. So I think from that point of view, we should be positive that there are some opportunities in it as well. To get to net zero, there's really two areas of work that need to be progressed. So, or two of the biggest areas to be progressed are how do we reduce the carbon footprint of heating our homes? And I think there's going to be huge opportunities in retrofitting and improving the heat efficiency of our homes. And the second area is about transport. Transport is a sinner in this area. And I think Lucy's absolutely right in what she said, in that we have to recognize that lots of communities still rely on cars for reasons that we will all understand. And therefore, the point also that Luke made becomes really important, is if we are going to have that transition to electric, the market will probably serve all the sort of denser areas and the main strategic road network probably reasonably well, but it will need the government to intervene to address sort of the not spots equivalent of that were allowed to emerge in mobile phone connectivity. We don't want not spots on electric vehicle charging as well. So actually, these are the areas where, in addition to what the market can deliver, and this is true of the north, it's true of the southwest, it's true of lots of rural areas right across the UK, is how do we make sure that there is a cohesive and comprehensive coverage for electric vehicle charging? And that's something we're looking at very much with our constituent authorities in the north, right across the north, saying, how do we actually address those sort of not spots, for the lack of a better word? The other big element in transport, or the two other big elements in transport and the route to zero carbon, is there's a reasonably clear pathway for cars to become electric, and notwithstanding what I've just said about the charging points, where there is a lot of work needed is on the rail network and for larger vehicles, particularly heavy goods vehicles and buses, where batteries sometimes struggle to provide the power that's needed. And that's potentially where hydrogen comes in. And hydrogen, there's about to be a big pilot in Switzerland where 25 heavy goods vehicles powered by hydrogen fuel cells are going to be piloted. And we are very keen to see some pilots in the UK as well. Now, on sort of the opportunity this throws up, I think the UK was relatively slow to take some of the opportunities in the manufacturing side for, say, offshore wind, and a lot of that got outsourced around the world to different manufacturing plants. on something like hydrogen, I think we want to be at the front of the queue to try to create those green jobs in the UK. And for instance, where Martin is in Sheffield, there's one of the world's biggest manufacturing plants of electrolyzers, ITM Power, that are absolute global leaders. We need more of that type of activity in the UK. We need, I think for hydrogen, we probably need the government to set up contracts for different type of approach to encourage hydrogen production, to actually start to get more hydrogen sort of production installed around the UK. So I think, and likewise on rail, we need to get more pathfinders and pilots to get hydrogen on rail, as well as a rolling programme of electrification. Too many of the railways in the north are still diesel powered rather than electric power. So there's a whole raft of initiatives needing done, but behind that all is one big point. We want hugely improved railway connections in the north of England to enable car users to make a choice. So Northern Powerhouse Rail being one example of that. We would like to have people choosing to leave their cars behind because the railway service was both reliable, frequent, and connecting those communities in a way that people could perhaps use their cars less. And that ties in with active travel, exactly as Lucy said as well. We need that active travel network, giving prioritization back to pedestrians and bicycles. And all the evidence shows if you do that properly, people will stop lots of those small journeys that cause both congestion and poor air quality. So there's a whole raft of initiatives needed, but I think a lot of these actually create opportunities for work, and as well as there being people having to change perhaps their behaviours or habits. So.
Excellent, thank you, Barry. Jane, do you think there's going to be a challenge of getting people back onto trains in terms of just their confidence? I think a lot of people have used their cars because of the pandemic. Do you think that people will come back to public transport because that's critical to supporting this net zero agenda?
You're absolutely right, Hannah. And we do have to restart the clock on the modal shift. We've spent the last 12 months, government campaigns have actually said don't use public transport. Our industry is now, so it's not just rail, that's also bus, but our industry is now mired in are we safe? And we've seen capacity drop down to 5-10% in some places. So we've definitely got to rebuild confidence and rebuild that love of rail and that want to switch from the car onto the train or into the bus. So that will have to be where we start. Net zero will help with that. And the people we do know, we saw last summer a bounce back amongst leisure travel in particular, with sort of on our services we're recording around about 50% of our normal loading. So that it shouldn't be too difficult to build back around leisure in particular, but we don't know what's going to happen in the world of work. We've all been talking earlier about whether or not the permanent shift to working at home or certainly hybrid and what that'll actually mean to commuting traffic. And of course, it's commuting traffic that helps to subsidise the cost of providing the rural services, the local services, those services that will never be able to afford a rail service simply through revenue. So there's quite some big questions that rail will need to answer, but rail is absolutely an answer to net zero. So we need to find a way of making sure that we do build back that confidence and we do provide the rail service that business needs, that connects the communities, that works for the north, that works for the south, that works for the whole of the UK. So I know we're maybe coming on to talk about rail in more detail later, so I don't know whether you want to go on through it now, but it's definitely a place for hydrogen, but there's also a place for better battery technology. And that will mean that up for the southwest, the overhead electric lines finish at Newbury, or they finish weirdly just outside Chippenham. They don't go into Bristol Temple Meads, so it doesn't go to Bristol even. So there is a vast swathe of the southwest that doesn't have any electrified railway. But what we do have are hybrid trains. We can switch from electric to diesel, and Hitachi are now looking at whether they can put a battery into those long distance trains. So we can switch from overhead lines onto a battery, which saves all of the infrastructure costs and means that we can run long distance, environmentally sound trains right the way through on a battery. So that we shouldn't dismiss the opportunity that improvements in battery technology are also going to bring. So I think But first of all, yes, we will need to encourage people back onto rail.
Thanks, Jane. We had an additional question around the same sort of topic, which is around sort of, should businesses be encouraged or even obliged to adopt digital methodologies for their transactions between different organisations? Martin, do you want to talk a bit about what your company's been doing around net zero?
Yeah, thank you. Just let me spend a couple of minutes sharing our experience. In October last year, we achieved net zero carbon emissions in our UK operations, and we're now on track to achieve global net zero greenhouse gas emissions in all of our worldwide operation by 2029. I think this is the issue that we all have to grapple with, quite frankly. I agree with Luke. Much has been said, but very little has been done. And we have done it because it is the single most important issue for our business. There is nothing that sits above this. We've worked on this for the last 5-6 years. Our people demand it. It drives our productivity. It enhances our profitability. It gives us new access to investment. We work with our supply chain. We attract the right skills. If you speak to most 18, 19-year-olds, as we do, they want to work for companies who take net zero seriously. The other thing we've done is we've created a better world solution, which is our attempt to reach out to other businesses, organizations who would like to work together in this space, because we recognize that as one business, we're not going to make a significant impact on this just by what we do. But if we can create a broader collaboration of businesses, local authorities, charities, voluntary organizations, we might all begin to work together. And our Better World solution, and it's on our website, is an invitation to any business, quite frankly, to come and speak with us. We are working with other companies. We are beginning to build some constituency in this, because we do think that the more we talk about it, the more we share ideas, the more we work together, then we will make net zero work. But I come back to it again. This is not something that we ever embarked upon as a choice. It was an urgent imperative for our business. And it's about profitability, productivity, growth, skills, investment, and innovation. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. It's yeah, it's really powerful to hear the business case for moving towards net zero, and how it's actually increased, how it's benefited your business. I think at times it feels like another thing to worry about, whereas actually it can be something that can be really productive. Tim, how important do you think this agenda is in terms of, sort of attracting people to a business?
Yeah, I mean, I think Martin's right in that we've got a generation now, and rightly so, that are passionate about the environment. They're passionate about doing the right thing, and therefore, as a business, it's something that all businesses that we need to take seriously. I think, in the digital sector, perhaps the carbon impact is perhaps less, but I think there is a challenge for organisations like ours, which is or the green agenda at the moment is that we need to pay quite expensive consultants to calculate carbon emissions for us, to understand what the picture of that is, and therefore develop that process. And I think that's a challenge for businesses. I know for SMEs there's a little bit more support, but we've got to get it to be an important part of the agenda and make it easy for businesses to really understand and tackle this. I think in terms of the adoption of digital methodologies, I mean, we have all surely learned an awful lot this year around the use of digital and digital communication. I mean, a business like ours anyway, we rarely have physical meetings with anyone external. That actually, we've built our business like that. So we absolutely believe in that this is achievable and efficient and highly productive. I suppose the challenge comes in the inequalities of digital and the challenges over this last year. Obviously, us working in education, we've seen with schools, we've seen this massive divide about young people have either got access to the technology they've needed for homeschooling or they haven't. And there's been a lot of initiatives and sort of momentum to try and fill that gap. But I think, you know, I think we've got a certain distance on this, and we've got to reflect now and not go back to some of those previous ways of working. And I think that has some environmental benefits. I think if you look at education, you know, the big challenge here is around going forward, are kids going to continue to use devices, you know, Google Classroom as an example, digital learning? The challenges, and it's back to that reform question around education, is education moving quick enough or willing to now also grab the baton and really change the way it's working? And I think there's some really interesting challenges there, and it's, you know, companies like ourselves that are working hard with education to try and improve that.
Thanks, Tim. If ever there was evidence of how a crisis can drive innovation, it's the way that our local primary school has adopted Google Classroom and other kind of online solutions to education. It's been quite beneficial. Luke, the cost issue, you know, it can feel like if you don't really know where to start with net zero, the costs, particularly at a time when businesses have been under huge pressure, used up reserves, don't necessarily have the cash available, it can feel like a bit of a mountain to climb. What can be done to both reduce the costs of enabling businesses to move to a greener footing, and to sort of myth bust around some of the issues that they perceive?
Well, our cousins across the pond say that green is green, which is a really useful phrase that translates horrendously into British English because our currency isn't green coloured. However, the principle is a good one, that you make savings by investing in technology. I think sometimes the challenge around net zero can feel a bit like eating an elephant. As the person responsible for animal welfare for the Labour Party, I don't advise people eating elephants, but the idea is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one mouthful at a time, is really important. And so when you're approaching it for a business for the first time, you know, reducing 100% of your carbon emissions in one easy go is probably impossible. There's very rarely one silver bullet or a single intervention that can do that, but there are interventions that will reduce your emissions over time. And especially looking at where the low-hanging fruit is for businesses to make that journey, to start that journey and to bring their workforce along with it. I think there are very few businesses for whom their workforce are not wanting their employers to be passionate about the environment, to make it part of their core business objectives. It's a really important part of recruitment and retention. And so I don't think it is an option for businesses not to do this. The challenge, I think, that was picked up by an answer previously is who is doing this? Because, you know, are we expecting our businesses paying expensive consultants to come in to advise on it? Well, actually, you probably know your business better than anyone else. And so there's probably changes you can make with yourselves to look at it, both in terms of travel to work plans, in terms of corporate assets, in terms of structures, in terms of investments, in terms of renewals. There's plans as to how it works. And there's certainly lots of help available, whether, you know, I know the Chambers of Commerce have support, CBI, other business groups. The government has support. It's a little bit piecemeal, and I'd like it to be a wee bit more comprehensive, but support is available. And depending on which region you are, Plymouth doesn't have a metro mayor, but large parts of the country do or are about to have one. There's huge political focus on helping businesses move in that direction. And there are also grants available for some of those changes. The problem is it's all a little bit complicated and confusing at the moment. There doesn't seem to be a single one-stop shop where business can gain that support and be able to access some of that funding. And some of that is local, regional and national. So there does need to be a wee bit more of streamlining of that support. But I don't think there's a business out there that really should be in a situation where they're not taking steps towards becoming net zero at this point. That everyone needs a plan. And no matter what your business is, you will need to get to net zero because the nation needs to get to net zero. And the businesses that get left behind suddenly will find themselves unable to tender for contracts because procurement rules will mean that they won't be able to be valid. You know, and so you've absolutely got to do this. This is business critical. And politicians, I think, need to be clearer in our language about it, because there is no excuse for businesses not to be doing this now. when government talks about building back better, it's fine nicking 3-word sound bites from the environmental left, but you've got to have the policy behind it, and you've got to have the intent behind it, the capacity and the intent. And the intent here is a clear message to businesses: not having a plan about going net zero is not acceptable. It's not acceptable to customers, to employees, or to those people in public life. So you've got to have a plan. If you need help and support, help is available, but you've got to have a plan. And besides, going green will help your bottom line. So if you're in business, it's very poor business sense to not be taking these steps in that direction.
Thanks, Luke. Agree about the business imperative, but also I think there's some significant gaps that government and others need to fill in terms of the steps that we all need to take towards net zero, and chambers will do what they can to help. One chamber in particular, and the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, is doing a lot of work around circular economy, which I found it was quite a new concept to me when I came into the chamber movement, and quite fascinating. Alison, I think you've got some experience with this. Do you want to we've got other topics to get onto, but just briefly tell us a bit about circular economy and how people could get involved in that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So I'm facilitating some of the peer networking for the LEPs, and one of the topics that came up as one of the challenges was the circular economy, and to feed in, to the net zero and younger people. I think that, and education, because if you look even in the small business community, there's surplus old stock of kit. And if you look at that being refurbished and then sending into education or for the underprivileged, actually that's a really good way of recycling it, and it helps the offsetting. So I think it's really getting people to think about that circular economy and what they can do. And I do think that collaboration, so again, this is something we're working really closely in Swindon and Wiltshire, is trying to move that stuff around, which again doesn't mean it goes to landfill, it's reducing the emissions. So to me, one of the key things around this is really getting people to grasp the circular economy, because I think that will automatically reduce the emissions and help education.
Thanks, Alison. I do recommend having a look into the circular economy. My favourite example was there was a shopping centre, I think it's in Glasgow, where all of the cafes take their ground coffee, the coffee that's been used to make everyone's coffees, and they use that to feed the plants within the shopping centre. So nothing goes in the waste, and it all goes back into helping the plants to grow, which is a great small example, but that kind of thing can happen a lot. Do keep an eye on the chat, because there's some interesting contributions coming through there, and some discussion around the role of education, schools, in terms of getting young people engaged in this agenda, and other things coming up there. Moving on to something which is a bit of a hot topic for today. So this is a question from David, who's an MD from an expanding SME based in the Southwest. And he said, with businesses planning to return to some semblance of normal working, what are the panelists' views on employees needing to have had the vaccination before being allowed to go back to their offices or other places of work? How do business owners and managers balance the need to protect their staff with the desire to respect and recognise an individual's right to refuse the vaccine? And I should just add that there are some people who are not eligible for the vaccine, either because of their age or because they're pregnant or other conditions. So how do we get the balance between those things? Come to the doctor first, Lucy Jane.
Okay, so this is a really tricky area, isn't it? And I guess my first point is, having looked at it from a historical perspective, we've never been a country that does compulsory vaccination, so that's not a thing. However, for certain jobs, for instance, when I went to medical school and in an ongoing way, I have to prove that I'm immunised against appropriate. You don't want me as a doctor doing stuff to you if I'm potentially going to have TB or something. So there is a precedent for checking immune status for certain jobs. And I think we need to really think carefully about how that translates into a broader sphere. So for instance, I would say equally, if you're working in a care home, for instance, where you have a really highly vulnerable population, probably we need to have some very strict rules about who should be working in those environments, and they probably do need to be vaccinated. And it's really difficult, because what do you do with the people who are already working there who don't want to have a jab? And that's very complicated. I think that's a situation you have to get legal advice. But really what we need to do is we need to up our game with regards to occupational health. I think, even within the NHS, it's not as well funded as it could be. We could really do a lot better. One of the things that is really worth knowing is that we're seeing, obviously in our older vulnerable population, we see mortality, so we see people die. However, in our younger working age population, we're seeing increasing numbers of long COVID, and actually the morbidity associated with COVID is going to last for a long time. And we're only really seeing the tip of the iceberg at the moment. The data that is coming out at the moment is really quite concerning. However, there are glimmers of hope. First of all, is to mention that actually there seems to be a reset. If people have the vaccine, it seems to reset things with regards to long COVID in some cases. So that might be a positive and might help encourage people to have it. And the other thing to say is that, you know, our vaccine program is going to be a rolling thing. It's not going to be a one-off, you have it now or you have it, you know, in the next few months and that's it. It'll be every 6 months or so that we will need to have vaccines. It's a massive program and people have got to buy into it. The most important thing that really caused us problems is at the beginning of all of this, you know, a year ago, everyone talked about herd immunity. And herd immunity only really exists in the context of having a vaccine. Vacca meaning cow, from the Latin for cowpox. It's really quite interesting. I can talk to you for hours about it. But herd immunity is going to be incredibly, incredibly important. It isn't just individuals having the vaccine, it's across the population. And those numbers have got to be quite high to make it safe. So to get to that point, we really need to get people vaccinated. So I think it's occupational health. It's probably looking at the sort of legal, ethical issues and making it as acceptable as we possibly can. And also to mention, I think you can have the vaccine during pregnancy. I'd have to check for you.
Thanks. And good news about the vaccine. I wonder if I get my sense of smell back. I lost it over Christmas and it hasn't returned thanks to COVID. Jane, we were talking about getting people confident about getting back on transport. Do you think that some kind of vaccine passport would help with that?
I don't think that's anything that UK Rail would think. I don't know whether that's something that International Air might think about, but certainly I don't think we would. You wouldn't get the trains to run on time if we had to stop and check everybody's passport, I think is the basic answer. And nor do I think that people will necessarily feel that the state should be interfering quite that much. But it, as Lucy said, it is a balance. I think if you're looking at people who are working in care homes, people could understand that. I don't think they would necessarily feel that in order to be able to get on a train or a bus, that they'd need to be vaccinated. I hope they wouldn't feel that public transport was that so unsafe that they couldn't get on a train, and in the same way as they might go to a shop. I mean, you'd basically be saying you'd have to stay at home, and I don't think we're quite at that stage. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe other people have different ideas, but certainly it's not something that is currently even being considered within the UK public transport.
Thanks, Jane. Barry, how important do you think that this idea of some sort of pass to say you're either negative COVID or had a vaccine, how important is that to getting people back out and about again?
Well, speaking as somebody who hopes to have their vaccination in just under a week, which I'm quite excited about, I have to say, the thought that I would even find myself saying that, you know, a year ago, you wouldn't have imagined being excited about something like a vaccine. So I think it's been the most extraordinary year of the government intervening for good reason in our liberties. You know, so it's been remarkable for all the wrong reasons, in many ways. And the vaccination program has clearly given us, you know, a hope and potentially a pathway. But I'm actually very worried about the variants. You know, this is something that, you know, and this is where I think Lucy's point is really key, that this vaccination, you know, may we need boosters, may we need some top up and so on. So actually, you know, I'm not one of these people that thinks actually this is all going to be plain sailing going forward. I think what Lucy said about looking very carefully about where you might want people to be vaccinated, I think is probably a reasonable point to make, but looking at that very carefully. I think getting people back onto public transport once they are vaccinated themselves is much more about building confidence around cleanliness. People who've continued to use public transport are actually confident about using it. All the evidence shows that those who've been out on buses, trains, trams, feel relatively relaxed about using them. And that was even last summer when use got back up to 50-60% of previous pre-COVID levels. So from that point of view, I think we do need at the right time to encourage people back to public transport. I think the point around actually trying to sort of check people getting on and off trains, I just practically don't see how that would ever work, even if that's what anybody wanted to do. So I do believe it's actually more about protocols. We may well have to wear masks still, for instance. I don't know. This is the sort of thing we'll need to look at as time goes on. And use of hand gel, hand washing, and so on. So I think there's a lot of practical things we can do that will give people the confidence to use public transport. I think that's at the root of it all. I think as a society, we've always relied on a sense of personal responsibility as at the heart of much of what we do in the UK. And I think that's probably the right approach. But I think the government may need to introduce rules as and when they're needed. So.
Thanks, Barry. We were discussing this with my team this morning. It's just sort of fraught with kind of ethical and really difficult questions about how you get that balance right. Martin, as a sort of business owner, how have you dealt with sort of workplace testing, and have you thought about sort of the future of vaccine status in terms of your business?
Yeah, this is very, very difficult. The law is quite clear. People can't be forced to be vaccinated. But then at the other end of the spectrum, all employers have got a legal obligation to provide a safe place of work. And one of the things that I think is going to become very problematic in some businesses is how do you deal with the risk of people who haven't been vaccinated, and do they put at risk your ability as an employer to provide a safe place of work? And I think that's full of legal complexity that I would need some time to think about in terms of what the answers might be. But I think Barry's touched upon something that is actually really, really important. I don't think we need government intervening in this area. I think we need to be taking individual and collective responsibility as individuals, as communities, as businesses. And certainly in our business, what we've done is we've talked to the staff daily about this. We've made a point of speaking to every one of them. If they want to talk to us about their approach to vaccination, very happy to do that. We encourage them to tell us when they've had the vaccine, if that's something they'd like to volunteer to us. And that's helping us to build a trust and a sense of understanding with them that we're kind of all in this together. And I think that will help us to not only make our staff feel confident, which is another word that Barry used in public transport terms, and I think it's equally important in business. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of our staff feeling confident about coming back to work. But coming back to work is not about just walking through the door of the factory or the door of the office. It's getting on a train, it's getting on a bus, it's getting into a car, it's whatever else it might be. So I think we've got to try and look out for each other. But there seems to be no doubt that unless we get people vaccinated, and I'm not a medical person, then we will forever be dealing with a higher element of risk in terms of this pandemic. But I don't think this is going to be easy for business. The other thing I think will happen, unfortunately, is it always does, I think there will be some very, very ruthless employers out there who will make a very, very clear statement about people who haven't been vaccinated. And I think that needs to be called out if it's happening.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so, lots of issues to consider. Luke, I think this is going to become a bit of a political issue as well. The Prime Minister's been flying a few kites around what the government may or may not do in respect to vaccine passports. What's the Labour view on what's going to happen next with this?
I think you're right. This is going to be a really important emerging area, and it's not an easy one to look at. I think whether we are going to have COVID vaccine passports or vaccine certificates, which seems to be the government's preferred language for it, certainly many of our international friends are. And that's certainly going to be present for international travel. And so to a certain extent, there will need to be vaccine certificates and the acceptance of them if we want to participate on an international stage and travel. So they are a reality. I think the Prime Minister is deliberately flying kites on this to see how it lands. It's not an easy thing to do. It really isn't. And there are real challenges, especially for those on the right of politics who have been majoring on the civil liberties angle around this in supporting a COVID a vaccine certificate. We on the Labour Party have always favoured that vaccines are not compulsory, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be professions or types of behaviours where a vaccine certificate passport won't be required. I think what you do need to have around this is a better quality public debate around it at the moment, because the idea of simply slapping a COVID certificate on people without their public support, or delaying the debate because it's difficult deliberately until you get after the May elections, which largely is where the government wants to be, fly a few kites beforehand so they look like they've done it, park big difficult decisions that won't scare off especially swing Tory vote until after May's election. So I would expect there to be a window where businesses and the public won't be having clarity, but that will resolve itself probably after May. But we do need to have a fuller debate about what is appropriate, but also a bit of honesty from ministers about how long this is going to last. Because the language that once we unlock completely on June 21st, which I hope will still be the case, that COVID suddenly somehow gone, it hasn't. Coronavirus is going to be with us for a very long time by the looks of it. We are doing better in Britain than many of our friends abroad are, but the risk of new variants entering the country, especially with the holes in our quarantine policy as we currently got as a country, is very real. So the risk of a variants not being affected in the same way, the same efficacy as the virus, as the vaccines we have currently, is a real threat. And I would like the government to frame the discussion around vaccine passports and vaccine measures in the context of this is going to be with us for some time, and to tell a story about how people can understand what will change and what won't change from some of the restrictions. Because the idea that everything's going to simply go away after June 21st, I don't think is true. The idea that this is going to be a one-shot vaccination that only needs to be taken now, it could well be an annual thing like the flu jab, which means we'll need infrastructure and support in able to get that. And for those people that you rightly said, Hannah, in your initial question, that won't be able to have the vaccine for whatever reason it may be, is being able to support those people that might want it but can't get it, perhaps in a separate category of those people that are choosing not to have it, to make sure that we are looking after everyone. But at the moment, I don't think we're going to get any immediate quick answers, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Luke. Yeah, I suspect this one's going to dominate the headlines for a few more weeks before we get some decisions. Lucy Jane, do you want to come back on that, and particularly the sort of question around variants and how much of a risk that is in the future of the vaccination programme?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing that's difficult is this is a new disease. It's not like something we've had before, but the problem is that we knew it was always a risk. I did a master's degree, 10 plus years ago, and it's like public health 101. There will be a pandemic, and if we're really unlucky, it'll be SARS, and that's what they said to us. We all knew. So anyone who wasn't worried about this just wasn't paying attention. And actually, my membership, as you know, the doctors, we are angry. If you're not angry about this, and you're not angry about the fact that we've had one of the worst death rates per capita in the world, you should be. Because even with the lockdowns and all the other things that have happened, as a country, we've messed this up significantly. And, you know, I represent doctors who've been working in COVID wards and working in ITUs, and it's been horrific. I've seen colleagues go through stuff that's been awful. We're now seeing actually, and I really worry about this coming into the summer and into next year. I'm already seeing lots and lots and lots of patients, and across the country we are, that haven't been seen for all the other things because the NHS sort of shut down effectively. So we're going to see a massive, massive winter spike as we go into this coming year. Without COVID variants, we're already facing a massive crisis. So don't be complacent about this. It's going to go on. I think in terms of variants, Brazil, if you're not worried about Brazil, you should be worried about Brazil because it is out of control in Brazil and we're seeing new variants. We've also seen the South African variant. These are all really worrying, and actually the data on whether or not the current vaccine works on those variants, but not only that, does it carry on working past a few months? It's that data just isn't out there because it's such a new vaccine. So, you know, I think we have to be really tight and really strong on where we go on this. And the final thing I would say to you, everybody's talked about hand washing. We all talk about hand washing and hand gel and all that stuff. Actually, the evidence is that it isn't carried really on fomites. We don't catch it from hands, we catch it from aerosols. So actually it's being in a contained space with other people. That's the issue. So things like public transport, what we need to do is we need to make it as safe as we can by wearing masks. And I'm afraid things like masks, we're probably going to be doing that for some time. And, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if that's for some years to come. But we mustn't underestimate this. We mustn't think it's going to go away. And we also need to be really careful with variants that actually they are more dangerous than the versions we've seen already. So we need to be really, you know, sensible about when we move forward on this.
Strong word of caution there from Dr. Davies. Thank you for that. We are coming up short of time. We had a couple of questions come in around transport infrastructure and digital connectivity, which we touched on earlier, but a question around, you know, how is it that we're spending an awful lot of money connecting London and the Midlands with HS2, but parts of the Southwest, as we've said, don't have electrification, don't have reliable transport systems, takes a long time to get between, you know, different places. And on digital connectivity, how can we make sure that we've got the digital infrastructure we need to support the ways that we're adapting and working? Now, we're not going to have time to get through the two questions, but I think they're both really clearly linked to the levelling up agenda, which is really, you know, a buzzword that's been around since the general election and beyond, which is, you know, how do we make sure that in the recovery, which we're hoping to get to, that it affects every part of the country, that every part of the country is able to flourish and grow in a recovery and in a better future, in a greener future. So I'm going to give every panelist 60 seconds, or a bit less, just to say, you know, in terms of levelling up and connecting the country and enabling each part of the country to flourish, what would be the one thing that you would like to see in the recovery to make that happen? So quick think, and I'm going to go first to Barry.
So I for a long time, I say the one thing I would like to see happen is for the Treasury to move to the north. And now actually that is due to happen, because I think decision making needs to be overhauled in the UK to help places like the Southwest and the north and elsewhere. So that's what I've said for a long time. Now I'm saying what we need to build confidence in the north, which is the area, is commitment to Northern Powerhouse Rail, which will be the bit that will transform opportunities for people right across the north, right up to the northeast, right across from Liverpool to Hull and down to Sheffield, that would allow people to continue to live in one place but to work in another. And that connectivity, even if you're commuting one day a week, will allow the liquidity and access to a big job market like people in the southeast and London have had for many years. And I think that is the big thing that would give businesses confidence to invest in the north.
Thank you. Alison.
Same sort of thing. I mean, it's interesting because there's obviously, you know, the pot is not never ending. And literally, I think it is just always selling the benefits, and he who shouts loud gets the most money, doesn't it? And I think it's having really good business cases and putting it in and really just having to fight your corner in it, because everybody is trying to get their access to the same, you know, every single region throughout the country and, you know, all over the place have got the same challenges, and it's just trying to sell the benefits of why you should get it over everyone else. And, you know, that's my sort of thoughts on it. Like, put a great business case, sell it for your area and go.
Thank you. Luke.
Well, the levelling up agenda has entirely missed the Southwest out because we have incredibly low levels of spending. It's great news that the Conservative government has discovered the north of England after 10 years of completely missing it by. So there is absolutely a really good case for investing in our friends in the north, because the infrastructure, the levels of per capita funding is simply not good enough. But if we're having that debate, let's not jump into the lazy logic that the South's got it and the North hasn't, because the Southwest has some of the poorest communities in the entire country. So if I could ask for anything, I want to see us get our fair share. Better decision making will help, but part of that has to be the Southwest lifting its voice. We don't have the Metro Mayor platforms that other parts of the country do that have created enormous political attention on their calls for greater investment and a fairer share funding. So we need to make sure that we are kicking our largely pedestrian bunch of members of parliament to rally and organise and work together, but we're also lifting and increasing the volume of our businesses, because as a region with enormous amounts of medium-sized enterprises but not a lot of large companies, we don't have the businesses with a PR team and a public affairs team in the same way as other regions do. So we need to make sure that we are amplifying and giving a bigger platform to those SMEs to make sure that message is carried confidently to government. But when we've got an entire region, which is the government majority in terms of figures, we should be getting more than we're getting at the moment. So we need to keep making the case positively and constructively that investing in the Southwest will create more jobs and allow the government to collect more in taxes so they can spend that wherever they want to. But invest in us, not as a charity case, but because it makes good business sense.
Thank you. And hopefully the Freeport will go some way to bringing a bit more attention to that part of the world. Tim, you next.
I suppose I agree with Alison on this one. I think during COVID, what I've experienced in this last year is a better collaboration than we've ever seen before across the sectors. And I think, we've got to build business cases as areas, as cities, and the guys who are being successful are generally the people who are united in purpose and in vision and have that clarity. And I think, even for us on a local level, we've got to do this efficiently and effectively now. And I think we've seen the start of that. We've just got to see that through now and execute that.
Thank you. Lucy Jane.
Learning how to do the unmute button quicker would be a good start. I was going to say about representation and regional government. I think particularly down into the far southwest, so Devon and Cornwall, and actually into Somerset, we have some of the highest levels of socioeconomic deprivation across Europe. We're not even just in the UK league. We're off the scale. And post Brexit, obviously, we've seen huge amounts of EU funding also pulled, and a lot of our traditional industries are shouting very loudly about the impact that they're having at the moment, particularly fishing. So there's a lot to be done, and I really worry about that representation. It's been absolutely achingly clear that during COVID, whereas other regions have had a metro mayor or somebody else to stand up and say this is a problem for our region, Devon and Cornwall hasn't really had anyone who said anything much, and it's at times trying to work out who you even ask for help and advice in terms of government is really hard. So we need proper regional government, and I think probably we need it across a broader part of the country as well, because the Southwest gets forgotten, and it's bloody gorgeous down here. It's amazing.
It is. Many happy holidays spent down in that part of the world, and I think there's a real devolution question that I think that's been raised through this pandemic. Very brief words then from Jane, and then I'll come to Martin.
I also live in Plymouth. I can attest it is definitely a beautiful place to live. I think good transport is about relevancy and about connecting communities in the way they want to be connected. My worry is that because we're having to move so quickly on the levelling up agenda, that we're building plans for yesterday's world, and we don't yet know what tomorrow's world looks like. We don't yet know how quickly people will resume working in the office, how often they'll work in the office, whether they really will move out of the cities and work in the countryside. So we don't really know what the transport of tomorrow needs to look like, because we don't really know what the world of tomorrow will settle into. So I think we need to do a lot of listening and talking, things like this, more of this, so that we can actually talk to people who are going to be making the decisions. People like Nationwide, who today decided that they are going to give people that opportunity to work from home forever if they want to, actually, and then build transport solutions that will suit what's happening. And if I could have one thing, we definitely want some minimum standards around the infrastructure, but I also think we want some minimum standards around ticket purchase, so that you can buy, everybody on their mobile phone can get one ticket through one back office situation that will get them bus, rail, ferry, theatre, whatever. So it's a UK wide, and it's actually making public transport easy. That's the answer.
Thanks, Jane. And a pitch here for a flexible ticket, so you don't have to pay full whack if you're a part-time commuter. Martin. final comment from you.
Thank you. I find levelling up gives me a headache, if I may say so. I was just looking at this last night. Levelling Up is UK Community Ownership Fund, Plan for Jobs, Freeports, UK Infrastructure Bank, the Towns Fund, UK Community Renewal Fund, Levelling Up Fund. I would suggest that government is going to be pumping money into our economy for some considerable period of time. I think it's probably going to be a national demand because clearly London and the southeast is now as impacted as we are in the north. But what I would say is this: if we want to change the landscape in the north of England, which is where we live, then I think we've got to be thinking much more strategically about levelling up. Levelling up for me is a proper education system where young people get the best opportunities in life and where kids in deprived communities can begin to have some aspiration. The second is, I think we need a far greater spend on R&D in the north of England. I was just looking at some of this last night. Government has plans to raise the total investment in R&D to 2.4% of GDP by 2027. The levels of R&D spent in the north of England are very, very small. And allied to that, I think we need a National Council for Innovation where we bring business, science, industry and education together. And the last thing I think if we want to do levelling up properly is something we talked about earlier. We all need to achieve net zero. I think if we could do those four things, we might actually begin to level up in a way that is of national scale rather than just this eternal situation of political plasters of pots of money and different funds that we all have to compete for.
Thanks, Martin. That's a great way to end the debate today. Thank you to all of you who've joined to listen in, who've posed questions, and particularly thanks to our fabulous panelists. If we were in a room, we'd give them a rousing round of applause, but thank you so much for participating. Really brilliant and wide-ranging conversation covering all kinds of different issues that are very relevant today. I think the key takeaways for me are around we're still in very uncertain times. It's very hard to see what's coming down the line, particularly with some of Lucy Jane's warnings around the future of the virus and what that might do. And that it's strange how something so tiny is controlling everything about our lives at the moment. But there's also something about opportunity to invest in people, to invest in our planet and in our greener economy, and to make sure that the recovery is something that works for the whole country in this levelling up agenda, and seeing transport and digital connectivity as a really core part of that. So really fascinating discussion, and thank you so much. Just a bit of a plug, our next and network-wide event is our global annual conference, which will be held virtually for the first time. That's on the 16th and 17th of June. You can find details on the British Chamber's website and on other Chamber websites. And please do keep in touch with your local Chamber of Commerce to find out what they're doing to support you on all of these issues, from skills to net zero, and obviously to continue to support businesses around the current pandemic and the situation there. So, and finally, just my thanks to Devon and Plymouth Chamber and to Sheffield Chamber, who led the way on this event, and for doing all of the hard work behind the scenes. I just had the fun bit of hosting you all today, and really grateful for having had this opportunity. So thank you to everybody involved.